G'day everybody, my name is Elliot Waters and you're listening to the Dysregulated Podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Right, today's episode is the next in the My Therapy Reflection series, and let me tell you, there's a bit to reflect on. So this is how it's going to work. There's going to be part A, which is this episode, and there's going to be part B. So part A looks at a therapy session I had a fortnight ago and all the reflections on that and all the conclusions that were drawn and the interesting new insights that were gained. And then part B is going to be about the therapy session I've just had this week on Monday, today being Wednesday night. So because you could squeeze them both together, these two therapy sessions, and they would just be continuous. It'd be beautiful. They flow perfectly from the first to the second one. It's so that's why I'm going to do it as this sort of part A, part B, instead of a separate reflections sort of episode, because they're very much intrinsically linked, I believe. So, and that's how I want to try and present the events here today, here on the podcast, and when I do the part B episode, which hopefully I'll do not long after this one. So part A, now, there's been a bit of time. I had to have a bit of time to think about it. Some details which always happens with therapy. You can't remember every little thing that was said, unfortunately. Well, at least if you're like me, you can't. I certainly can't. So part A is going to be, I'm going to try and make it as detailed as possible, of as much detail that I have at hand, if that makes sense. So I did think about writing and recording this episode straight after the particular therapy session a fortnight ago I'm talking about, but I chose not to because I really needed to think some of the things through and get my head around it first before I presented it in some sort of digestible form to you guys here on the podcast. So I wanted to do it justice, I want to do it properly, so I've taken a bit of time to have a think about it and think about the things that came up, and but now I think I'm ready to present the findings, the important details that were uncovered, and go from there. Because this is the thing. As we know, I'm a very complex case. So this isn't CBT sort of therapy stuff, you know. This is internal family systems therapy, and this is EMDR. So two very different therapies that are not like CBT at all, not even like DBT really either. And it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain what I uncover because it is so imaginative. It's very much right brain. You know, there's not, like I'm going to be talking about the parts, the cognitive overthinker, the inner critic, the workaholic, the 16-year-old loose cannon, my inner parts, and there's a few more that have popped up since as well. To someone who maybe doesn't have much experience with internal family systems therapy in particular, it might sound a bit weird, a bit like a fantasy sort of thing. But let me tell you, these parts are as real as anything that I know that is real. It's unbelievable, this therapy, how it can use your imagination to come up with these constructs which then fit into these sub-parts that then represent some really core sort of beliefs about the self. And then you can actually talk to these parts as well, and then move on and, have the parts with you, and you're all on the same team. And it's pretty hectic stuff. And I really needed to do an episode, just a basic one, on IFS, internal family systems therapy, because it's a beauty, but it is hard to get your head around, especially if you're just going into it for the first time in therapy. It sounds weird. It sounds like weird voodoo sort of stuff, but I'm telling you, give it a shot, because, well, for me at least, as I said, there's nothing more real in my world than my parts, my sub-parts, those sub-components which make up my psyche, which theoretically are all aligned with the self, the actual self that should have the hands on the steering wheel. But as you learn in this therapy, and I think I've probably got this point across already in some of the previous therapy reflections episodes, but as you learn, often it's not you behind the driving wheel, like think about if you're trying a diet for the first time, and how difficult it is to diet. Well, if it was the self calling the shots, it'd be easy because you just do it. But there's these other parts at play that, force you to do different things. And that's not the greatest example. I think the better examples are the ones I'm about to give now about my own personal experience. But there's all these different parts that are jockeying for position. Across the podcast, I've stated this case that within me there's these different disorders that are jockeying for position, but there's certainly these subparts that are jockeying for position as well. But now, whether you want to call them parts and, alter egos or just, a different, I don't know, manifestation of the self, however you want to call it, whatever you want to call it, the fact of the matter is the psyche is very complex and there isn't just one single sort of person that's calling the shots here. That's just not how it works, unfortunately. So, but what is exciting is that you can get into these subparts if you do internal family systems therapy, and you can really learn so much about yourself. And then you can really get a hold of these parts, which are only trying to do their best, and say, right, stick with me, trust me as the self, I've got this, but you guys have been looking after me, you guys have been protecting me, because that's what they're doing, these subparts. They're the workaholic is just doing it to protect me. My inner critic even, I have now seen, which I'll explain more about in a minute, I now understand how my inner critic may be actually on my side, and my inner critic is only doing what it's doing because it wants to keep the self safe. And, it sounds, again, maybe it sounds a bit fanciful, I'm not sure, but I'm telling you, this stuff is as real as it gets. So let's get into it anyway. So therapy session, the one a fortnight ago, I'll try and remember as much detail as I can, but I think the main points I'm pretty much across, and that's what I'll try and get across here in this episode. And then we're going to build on these sorts of uncoverings in the part B, because that episode, that therapy session certainly built on this first one, and there is very much a continuum between both. So anyway, my therapist said, how's things going, as she always does, and I usually say, it's up and down. But this particular time I really stressed the fact that anxiety is causing massive problems. And I knew this therapy session was going to be interesting because, I do the whole sleeping thing where I sleep for like 3 days. Well, this therapy session, and I booked this like this on purpose, actually interrupted one of these sleeping sort of episodes. It interrupted it, which was pretty good. And I forced myself, although I did have to use some dexamphetamine to do it, but I forced myself out of bed and I forced myself to get to this therapy session. And I said this to my psychologist. I said, you've got me in a pretty raw and vulnerable state, right off the bat without actually doing anything. Because I've pulled myself out of this slumber, this sleeping thing, this recharging that I do, this escape from the world to recharge those batteries. I've got myself out of that. I've ripped myself out of that back into the light of the day, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute. And I'm here sitting in therapy and I'm ready to go. And I tell you, I'm vulnerable. I don't know what's going to come out, but whatever's coming out, it's going to be the truth and it's going to be nothing but the truth. And I'm ready to go. That's pretty much what I said to her. I said, I'm freaking out. I've been freaking out, all week, as often I do, unfortunately, as every week I tend to freak out because, the world just shines too brightly, and that's what a big part of this episode is going to be about. So anyway, we asked the question, how's things been? How's it been since you were last here? And I say the same thing, like I said, up and down, and, I've been very, very anxious, same old, sort of same old. And then we sort of delved into things a bit deeper, and my psychologist was like, all right, are we ready to sort of pick up where we left off? Talking to the parts and all that sort of stuff. I said, yeah, I'm ready to go. I said, but I am feeling, she said, is there anything sort of coming to mind as we sit here today? And I thought, you know what, there actually is. I don't know if she could read it on my face or what, but I was like, there actually is. I feel like, I said, because I've been sort of ripped out of this slumber that I'm usually in, I feel like I'm at the top of like a well, like a really deep tunnel. I'm at the top of the tunnel and my head's just poking out over the top. And that's where I am here sitting in therapy today, because when I'm asleep in that slumber, I said, it feels like I'm in this tunnel, I'm in this tunnel, I'm under the sheets, I'm under the blankets, the blinds are drawn, everything's as dark as I can make it be. And I'm not hearing anything from the outside world because I'm in this sort of cocoon. I'm in this tunnel that I create for myself in my bedroom, which is full of darkness and terrible depressing thoughts and anxiety. And we know that I've had massive problems in this hole, in this tunnel, where the dark thoughts have got too much and I've had to go to hospital, and I've had these massive panic attacks where I'm dripping with sweat, absolutely going off my head. This tunnel, I said the tunnel feels like it's damp and there's no light, and it's really quite constricting as well, which I think is related. When I get really sort of depressed, like it feels like to me that the walls are closing in. And I said that it felt like I was at the bottom of this tunnel and the walls had closed in just enough where I didn't get crushed to death, but the walls were right there. And if I wanted to turn over, because I'm sort of laying down in this tunnel at the bottom here, if I want to sort of roll over, there's not much room to do it, and it's real squishy, and I've got to sort of, and it's, as I said, it's damp, and the walls are so close, I'm feeling really claustrophobic, which in the real world, I do feel very claustrophobic. And I do feel very claustrophobic, especially when I have the panic attacks, when I'm in these sorts of moments, these long slumbers where I'm escaping the world. So anyway, so that's why I said this is what it feels like. It feels like because with me, I'm very imagery sort of based. I'm very right brain, so this is very much a right brain sort of concoction. But it makes sense, and it certainly makes sense to me. I said, I feel like that I've been ripped out of my hole, out of the tunnel. I'm right at the top of the tunnel. I haven't peered out of it yet because the light is so blinding and bright that I just cannot climb out of the tunnel, out of this well, out of this hole in the ground, because it's just too bright. It's too bright. And again, that is very reminiscent of me in the real world, because especially when I come out of these slumbers, all my senses, they're dialed up to 11, you know what I mean? And especially, although I would say auditory, sensitivity is my biggest number one when it comes to sensory sensitivities. Usually it's noise that's the thing for me. But when I come out of these sleeps, these slumber, this hibernation period, everything's so bright. Everything is so bright and moving too quickly. And that's exactly what it felt like in this sort of image I was bringing to mind. That's the same thing. I'm on the edge of this well, this hole, this tunnel, whatever you want to call it. And it's just too bright out there. I'm not going out. It's too bright. I'm not going out. It's too bright. So that in itself was pretty profound, because now I have a bit more of a psychological understanding of what these sort of slumber things are all about. Now I can sort of visualize what's going on when I'm in bed for 3 days, barely drinking water, not having any of my meds. Like, I know it, and I've always sort of known this, but now I've put a picture to it that, it feels like I'm down this tunnel and the walls are so close to crushing me, but they're just not quite, but they're so bloody close. And it's so hard for me to crawl out of this tunnel because it's so goddamn bright out there. And I was sitting in this therapy session, and the window behind my psychologist, was there, and it was bright. It was so bright, middle of the day. And I even said, even as I sit here right now, like, it's too bright. Everything's too bright. And unfortunately, there were no blinds or anything to try and mitigate that as a problem for me. But, that's why I said, in this vision, like, I'm not climbing out because it's too bright and scary. And in the real world, I'm telling you, like, even driving from my house to my psychologist, which takes about 10, 15 minutes, even on that drive there, I was white-knuckling it sort of thing. It was white-knuckled stuff, just holding on, and everything was too bright. Everything was moving too quickly. And the same sort of pattern occurred when I got into the therapy room as well. It was the same thing. It was just too bright. Everything's too bright. The world is too bright. And that sort of makes sense. It makes sense from more of a psychological, scientific point of view. It makes sense from me having autism. It really does. Because for people with autism, often, I don't want to generalize here, but especially in my case, the world, as we know, is not really set up for the neurodivergent. It's just not. And for those of us with sensitivities, sensory sensitivities, the world is too bright, or it's too loud, or there's too many smells, or there's too many textures that we have to come across. Like, the world is too much for people with autism, Asperger's, if you want to go, Asperger's, autism, and many other mental illnesses, especially for people with major depressive disorder. The world is too bright. And that disorder actually makes the world darker. That's how terrible depression is. It literally makes the world darker and grey for people because the world is too bright. And for those of us with autism, I'll tell you, it is hard work. And it is. The world is too bright. There's too many noises. I can't handle it. There's too much going on. I've said before how difficult it is in the job that I have at Bunnings Warehouse, which again, Bunnings have been nothing but so supportive. And one day I'm going to do an episode dedicated to Bunnings and how great they've been for me. But the truth of the matter is, working in the timber yard at a busy Bunnings store, Bunnings Guitar, as I do here in Newcastle, it's constantly talking to customers. It's constantly hearing forklifts moving around. And although when I'm on the forklift itself, the world becomes very singular for me, and it's a really great exercise in mindfulness. And that's why I think I'm quite a good forklift operator, arguably the one of the best in the company for sure. But I am a good forklift operator because the world does go quiet. When I'm on that forklift, the world goes quiet. And it's not as bright because I'm focusing on that pallet that's got to go in that racking there. I'm focusing on that skid there with some stock on it that's got to go in the back of this truck. You know what I mean? The world becomes singular. It's not as bright. It's not as loud. I'm locked in. But take me out of that seat, out of the hot seat of the forklift. And when I'm, engaging with customers constantly and other team members, and it's just, I'm telling you, the Bunnings radio's blaring, and like I said, there's trucks and cars, there's kids yelling, there's dogs barking. It's too bright, it's too loud, and it's a really, really difficult job for someone whose social capacity has dwindled, because I've been with Bunnings for 8 years. I don't want to go off topic too much, but I've been with Bunnings for 8 years. And my social capacity, unfortunately, over those 8 years has dwindled, and it's becoming harder and harder because I just don't have the ability to engage like I used to. But I have to force myself, because you've got to work. I've got to pay for all these psychology appointments and stuff and all these medications. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is the world, for people like me, is too bright as just a general rule, okay? So it's too bright. And that's exactly what this image that I was coming up with, it was manifesting itself in this image, this idea that the world is too bright. And that's all well and good. So that was really good. That was great, but there was this other element. There was another element to it. There was another element, and it really come on strong, and there was no doubt about this. And I said to my psychologist, I was like, look, I just give me a minute just to, because she's probing, what's it look like, is there anyone standing at the top of the hole, of the tunnel, like, is there a ladder that goes to the top? And I was like, yeah, there's a ladder, and it's, it's in decent condition. So that tells me that the image is telling me that, I have the ability to climb out of this tunnel, and that ladder is strong and sturdy because the ladder, the way I pictured it, represents, the ladder is my ability to be able to overcome and get out of the hole, out of the tunnel. And that ladder was strong, it was sturdy, but it was also very, very bright, very bright. And I thought that was very interesting that at the top of the hole, it's bright at the top of the tunnel, but it's also really bright on the implement that I need to use to get out of it. So this whole process of climbing out of this tunnel is just bright, it's offensive, and it hurts the eyes, it hurts the ears, it hurts all the senses, except maybe taste. I don't know, there wasn't much taste going on, but you know what I mean. So even the my framework to get out of the tunnel, out of this depressing sort of hibernation that I go into, even the way in which I have to do it is really too bright. So I thought that was very, very interesting. But then it got more interesting. Can you believe it? So if you're still holding on, thank you. I'm sort of rambling a bit, but I'm telling you, this was very profound, very profound. And the fact that I can now, this in itself, this part that I've said already, the fact that I can even imaginatively, even the fact that I can, get that image into mind of what this process is all about, huge step forward. And it's made the whole process of potentially slipping into this hibernation mode again, but it's made it a little bit less scary because I understand more about it now. And I can sort of quantify it, and it's like, right, I can qualify it too. I can categorize it a bit. It's like, all right, so I can get a handle of this. I know what the picture is that it's painting here. I'm sort of all over this now. There's this psychological underpinning to it as well. This is great news. And that that emboldens you, it empowers you. And it was a huge breakthrough moment, but there were more coming. And this is what happened next. So my psychologist said, she said about the ladder and stuff, and she said, is there anyone at the top, is there anyone at the top of the tunnel, maybe, beckoning you to sort of climb out, trying to cheer you on? I said, holy dooly, there is. Now you might think maybe it'd be like my parents, or, my friends, or my co-workers, or, people in my support network. And I have a support network, and I'm a great support network. And I'm so, so lucky and blessed. And thank you to all of you who are listening. You know who you are. But sorry to say, it was none of you guys. Sorry, as good as you guys are, you guys were not the ones at the top of the tunnel, cheering me on, saying, Elliot, come on, you can do this. I'm telling you, even talking right now, we're 20 minutes into this episode. This is way longer than I planned, but still, I've got to get it out there, because I'm getting a bit choked up thinking about it, because at the top of the whole of the tunnel were these sub parts of mine. The 16-year-old loose cannon. He was there going, come on, Elliot, you've got this, mate. You've got this. I was like, holy dooly, thank you for the support. You're like, I knew you were in me corner, even though you get me to do some naughty things. Like, I knew you were backing me. Thank you so much. And then there's the workaholic, going, trying to tell me, it's all right. We got you, man. We got you. We're going to work through this. I was like, holy dooly, that is huge, holy crap. And the cognitive overthinkers there too. I'm saying like, we'll think this through. It's all right. Come to the top. We'll think this through. We'll come up with a plan. I was like, all right, this is pretty good. Like this is all so much. And then, who else was there? There was, I'm forgetting. Oh, well, then the big one is who was left was, and this is what I couldn't believe, and this is what gets me a bit choked up a bit because I couldn't believe it, but the inner critic was up there, the inner critic. Now this whole time for my whole life, ever since I discovered the inner critic concept, I've always thought the inner critic was my enemy, always. And my psychologist said, no, it's not, it's actually in your corner. You got to, just like the other parts of you, it's the same. It's a protecting part as well. It's just doing its thing. I was like, no, I don't believe it. Because the inner critic never, ever has anything positive to say, and never has. I'm like, nah, I'm sorry. Like a part that has nothing positive to say ever, how on earth can that part be in my corner? I cannot imagine that, and I refuse to believe it. Basically, that's what I was saying. I've said for so long. Even through this internal family systems therapy process, which has been so enlightening up until this point, I'm sorry, the inner critic is not in my corner, and I need to quieten it as much as I can. And I've said it in my Black Dog presentations. I would have said it in episodes gone by here on the podcast as well. The inner critic is not my friend. It is my foe, and I've got to figure out a way to shut it up for good. And then I was saying to my psychologist, I was rattling them off. Loose cannons there, 16-year-old, the workaholic, the cognitive overthinker. They're all there, this is unbelievable. But the inner critic was there too, and it was the one that was really like, mate, I've got you. You got to trust me for once, but I've got you. I'm looking after you. I'm telling you, grab my hand, I'll pull you out. And it was huge. It was huge. I'm telling you, I cried a little bit. It was massive. And it was the first time ever that I even thought that the inner critic was maybe in my corner. And my goodness, ever since that moment, the inner critic, there's no two ways about it. It's on my side, and I can see it now, and I'm very apologetic to this part that has done nothing but try to protect me. And if anything, it's the inner critic that's the one that's tried the most. It's tried the hardest because it's always there and it's always jabbering in my ear. But I now know that it is there. It's doing that because it's trying to protect me. It's trying to protect me from getting ripped off by people, essentially. It's trying to, and when I say ripped off, I mean like ragged on, it's tried to help me because it doesn't want me to look like a failure in the workplace. It's trying to help me because it doesn't want me to be a failure in my relationships. And the inner critic's just like, the inner critic only knows what it knows, and it knows things that maybe aren't right or aren't done as well as they should be. And it knows that those are weaknesses. They are potential spots of weakness where, people could say things about me, or I'll have I'll fall apart in a relationship, or in previously, that is, not anymore, of course, or I'll stuff up at work. The inner critic, yes, it is constantly on my back because it only knows that it needs to just keep on me so I don't do anything stupid, is essentially what it's doing. And it's like, man, and this is what it sort of told me was this part. This is the first time I'd communicated with it on this level, but it said to me, listen, mate, I've been there from the start. I've been there from when, you didn't quite fit in properly as a toddler at playgroup, and you were really shy at playgroup, which I didn't remember, but I now do. The inner critic was there because you got to remember, when I was in year 1 or year 2 or whatever, I was 5 or 6 years old. I'm thinking to myself on the monkey bars, I don't want to live a life where I'm anxious all the time. And what was also going on then was this inner critic was starting to form. Because even back then as a youngster, there were moments where I could see that I didn't quite fit in, and I was doing things maybe that didn't quite help me moving forward. And I didn't really know it very well, only in a very immature sense back then, but I knew well enough that I could come to that really clear cognitive thought that I don't want to live a life where I'm nervous all the time. And my inner critic basically said back then, although it was very much in its infancy, as I was as well, but it basically said, all right, I'm going to do what I need to do so you don't live a life where you're stressed all the time. So that's what it has done over the years, and unfortunately, the way in which it's gone about it has been quite difficult, but the reason, or a big part of it, is because I do not sort of gel in this world very well, very easily. And my inner critic knows that. It knows, Elliot, you're a bit different, mate. It knew I was different before I knew I was different. It knew my potential, say, social shortcomings a long time before I did. It could see how shy I was in playgroup, and how that might become a problem later on. And it was the inner critic that really drove in my teenage years that change in the way that I acted. I went from being sort of quiet and reserved to being this obnoxious, boisterous, loud individual who, because my inner critic said, have a look around. Who are the ones that are getting the girls? Who are the ones that are getting invited to the parties? It's the loud, obnoxious, boisterous ones. And my inner critic said, you are not that. And you know what? If you want to succeed in this world, you need to be that. And I'm going to make you that. And the inner critic has done that. And I always look down on it for doing that over the years and being like, damn, why did it push me into changing, how I acted and all this sort of stuff. Like looking back now, it's like, it's easy now looking back. But my inner critic was there saying, look, I'm looking around and this is what I'm seeing. And you're seeing it as well, obviously, because remember, the inner critic is still part of the self. So I know I'm talking about it separately, but for a moment, try and imagine the inner critic's not really separate. So I'm seeing the self. I'm seeing that I'm not getting invited to these parties, right? So the inner critic within is also seeing it through my eyes because we work in tandem, even though sometimes it's like we work separately. And the inner critic said, right, we need to change our approach because this ain't working, mate. This ain't working. You want friends, it ain't happening. So, it was a real huge, that was a real light bulb moment, let me tell you. It was. And I still can't believe, don't get me wrong, has my inner critic always done the right thing by me? No, I don't think so, but it has always done what it thinks is best. And unfortunately, because of these mental illnesses that I have, BPD being such a great example of that, because it really ruins your self-esteem and your view of the self, and the body image stuff plays into BPD. BPD and the inner critic are very much intertwined, and my inner critic has unfortunately been twisted a little bit by my BPD and by my autism and by my OCD and these obsessions and by all these anxieties. The social anxiety as well has been a huge part. They have twisted my inner critic, and they have created these other subparts of mine out of their pathology, if that makes sense. So these subparts of mine are a response to this mental pathology. So the inner critic is a response to the overall general not fitting in sort of mental pathology that has handicapped me socially in that way. The 16-year-old loose cannon is a direct result of borderline personality disorder, 100%. The cognitive overthinker is very much a direct result of OCD, these obsessions and compulsions that I have about different things, but also is a direct result of the autism too, because I do think differently, and I think maybe, I think about certain things more than others maybe do, and there's that overthinking component because this autistic brain of mine just does not stop. This ADHD brain of mine just does not stop, and as a result, this workaholic, this cognitive overthinker has come out of it. And I would say the inner critic is like the chief of the subparts. It is the number one, and it has been there since the start, definitely. And I've now seen it in a different light, its role in a different light, and now I understand that it's just like the other parts. It's on my side. It's in my corner. It's just tried to do the best that it's been able to with the tools that it's got. And unfortunately, because of these mental illnesses, my inner critic has gone, during growth and puberty, my inner critic was being injected with steroids, and it was BPD, it was OCD, it was social anxiety, generalized anxiety, whatever, all the autism, all the different diagnoses I've got. They were feeding this inner critic and just feeding it. My inner critic's going, holy dooly. Well, if I'm to overcome all this, I've just got to be the most rigid, I've just got to ride Elliot constantly, just ride him, because if I don't, then there will be an opportunity for these mental illnesses and for this world that he's operating in and trying his best, but it isn't cut out, he's not cut out for this world, let's be honest. If this is what my inner critic is thinking, if I drop the ball here and lower the intensity, that's when people are going to get him. And that's the huge problem. We do not want people to get him like they did during high school, for example. So my inner critic was there when I was younger, but it was high school, as we're going to discover more, which is really what brought on all of these subparts, what really brought on these mental illnesses and brought them to light, and what really has caused a lot of the problems that I deal with today, unfortunately. So that's half an hour of, I'm basically doing a full hour of the therapy session, not word for word, but this is dragging on a little bit, so I'm going to try and wrap it up because there is going to be a part 2. But then right at the end of the session, something else happened, which was very, very interesting, and it happened at the end of the session, and this was definitely carried over to the next one. And she said, because I in that moment, I wasn't able to get out of the tunnel. So back to the tunnel, all my subparts are at the top. And at this point, because I knew that when I went home from this therapy session, I was going back to bed. But I also knew I'd broken the cycle this time. So I'd go back home. I'd probably sleep till the next morning, but I knew that I'd be okay. I just knew I'd snap that cycle. This wasn't going to go back into hibernation mode. This was just, Elliot needs to have a bit of a lay down because this is full on. and we'll try again tomorrow, but we will try again tomorrow. So I knew that I was going to get out of the tunnel and I was going to, climb that very shiny, offensive ladder that was in there that I had to climb, which represented, the tools that I have at my disposal. That even that is often overwhelming. But at the end, so I never got out of the tunnel in this scenario. I never got out of the tunnel. My psychologist actually said, "Can you invite the parts into the tunnel with you?" And we decided as a group being me and my parts, we conferred very quickly, and we decided no, that wasn't a good idea because we don't want any more of Elliot in the tunnel, in the hole, in that damp hole. The fact that the self is in there, that's enough. That's enough. We do not want the rest of the parts to jump in as well, because then good luck to you. He ain't getting out, because he ain't getting out. And that's right. I would not be getting out, because it's these subparts that are protecting me that are also the ones that are going to help me climb that ladder and get out into the bright world and then proceed forward until the next hibernation mode, until I get that all sorted. But that was very poignant. That was huge. But then right at the end, I promise this is the last point, but right at the end, this was just as big, and this is what fueled part two, or will fuel part two when I tell you all about it. And that is the fact that there was this other random memory just popped into my head, because we were sort of thinking a bit about how the inner critic has probably been there for so long and all this stuff, and, trying to think back. The 16-year-old self, Elliot, you talk a lot about high school and stuff, Are there any other parts maybe from back then that are around? Because I forgot to mention this bit, but I could see in my vision, to me, like there were my subparts were at the edge, at the lip of the hole of the tunnel, at the top of the ladder. But it looked like to me, but it wasn't very clear. The detail wasn't there. But there might have been some other people or other parts standing behind the front row of the parts that are known. Maybe some unknown parts that are there as well. I just haven't uncovered them yet. So in my vision, these parts were grey. They were greyed out. And it's hard to describe because, in my mind's eye, I'd never be able to draw a picture of what I was seeing, but that was, like my subparts that I knew about, they were in the light, and then the subparts that maybe was there but I hadn't uncovered yet, they seemed really grey and sort of in the shadows a bit more. But then this other subpart came up. So I've spoken a lot about the 16-year-old, but then this 15-year-old self come up, and I was like, whoa, man, this is huge, because as soon as this 15-year-old revealed itself, this memory of me going to the movies, it come back so clear, so vivid, like I could feel it within like the pit of my stomach. I was like, oh, yes, this 15-year-old self, I know you very, very well. And I knew that this self, this part of the self, so hang on, this subpart, I knew this subpart carried straight away. I was like, right, you carry a lot of trauma. I can feel it in the pit of my stomach straight away, and I know where we're going back to because I can feel this as clear as day. And straight away I was like, yep, I know this movie's cinema idea, this memory of going to the movies. I know exactly where this is leading straight away. I haven't thought about this memory, and I do a lot of ruminating about the past, and I haven't thought of this memory in years. Like 10 years, 15 years, I reckon at least. I'd completely forgotten that this happened, but straight away, boom, it was like someone flicked the switch and I was there. I was back there again. So what I'm going to do, because this episode is nearing 40 minutes, if you're still listening, thank you so much. Thank you. And if you're finding this really interesting, please reach out and let me know because, to me, this blew my mind. But I'm going to save this memory that come back to mind at the cinemas. I'm going to save this for the next episode because a lot of the next therapy session, it was very much about the movie theatre, the movie cinemas. This particular Saturday afternoon when I went to the movies, there was 8 of us, 4 boys, 4 girls, and we were there because Elliot was trying to put the moves on who would eventually become his first girlfriend. But it was a very anxiety-provoking event, and there's trauma associated, and there's a little bit to unpack. But I'm telling you, if you find this sort of stuff interesting, this was because this 15-year-old self is not the 16-year-old self. I always thought the 16-year-old, the loose cannon, sort of covered all my sort of high school years. No, there's this 15-year-old self that is before all the getting ripped off and the trauma and all this has occurred and all the bullying and the peer pressure. And there's this innocent, beautiful 15, 14-year-old self that hasn't been tarnished by the world just yet, and I still have my innocence at this point. And again, I got very emotional. I was thinking about it because I feel so sorry for this part. And now I know that the 14, 15-year-old self, the 16-year-old self grew as a response to what that 15, 14-year-old self had to go through. And it's so sad. It's so sad. I think back, it's a little bit like inner child sort of stuff. The inner child was also in this vision, but again, I'll save that for the next episode. The next episode, Dysregulated Podcast. But the I felt the same sort of sadness that I feel for my inner child as I did for this 14, 15-year-old self, which I'm going to come up with a better name for it at some point. But at the moment, that's how I know this part as, and it's just sad because this poor, innocent, lovely boy, and that's all I was just a boy. I was being, again, I don't want to go too much into it, but, I was sort of being guided into this world of girls and sex and how important it was. And this poor boy just wasn't ready. I just want to play with my trains and watch trains and look at trucks and support the knights. And that's the thing. This part is still a huge component I've now discovered, and it all happened very quickly in this therapy session, but this part is still a huge part of the self. And I'm glad that it is, because that's a great part. This 14, 15-year-old self, look, he was a bit green, he was a bit of a clean skin, didn't really know how the world operated. I was sort of getting battered from pillar to post, but I still had my smile then. I was still smiling. I had hope, and I was a really nice young kid. I really was. And unfortunately, high school and some other factors that predisposed all of this that unfortunately created the perfect storm, and I'm talking even things like genetics and stuff like biology, neurochemistry, as well as, maybe my environment growing up, and then definitely high school was what really, really hammered this home. But this poor kid, I tell you, was just doing his best. And man, until I got twisted and chewed up and spat out, I was doing pretty good for a kid that had autism and ADHD and the beginnings of borderline personality. I didn't realize at the time, and it had manifested at 14, 15, but by 16, it certainly had. So the beginnings of BPD were starting to swell. I had no idea. I didn't even know at this point that, because I knew life was really hard, and it seemed, this is probably a story for another day, but I remember I used to think that life people seemed to be happier than I was. Because I knew within myself I was sort of putting it on a bit. I was faking it a bit, even back then. And I didn't think that other people seemed to be doing that. And even as a 14, 15-year-old, I had no idea what mental health was, mental illness. We didn't have black dog presenters such as myself coming to school, in year 10 and year 9 like I do now to the schools. And that's why I do it, because I do it for the poor kid that was like me, and I want to sort of help the kids, now at school, and be like, look, I'm not going to have all the answers in my, 1 hour presentation I do for the Institute, but maybe I'll start to get you thinking a bit about this sort of stuff, because it took me until I got the trauma to start thinking about it. And if we can get people thinking about it before that, we can have some really resilient people that can push back against those things, those negatives of the world before it gets too much, and then, others have to intervene. And, and that's a big part of what motivates me to do all this sort of stuff, because, that poor 14, 15-year-old self of me, he was a great kid. He was a lovely boy. And, I really tried hard to be a nice person, do the right things. And yeah, I don't know. It's just sad because that poor kid, unfortunately, went through a bit of stuff, and then I had to. Yeah, it spawned all these subparts, which again were a direct response to this pathology, and they've also done their best to try and keep me on the straight and narrow. But what chance did we have? As we'll find out in more episodes of the podcast. But this is a huge one. I know this is a big episode. I know. Thank you everybody for listening. I do appreciate it. But this was huge, man. Huge. The fact that memory popped up right at the end, I said to my psychologist, I said, "Oh, look, this is going to be a big one for next time." Because I didn't have an appointment booked for the week after because it's costing so much money. But I actually rang up and said, "Look, I want to really hit this while the iron's hot. Strike while the iron's hot. Hit this while it's really going." Because I think this is one of those breakthrough moments. So get me another appointment next week if you can. Let's dive into it again. And that's exactly what we did on Monday, today being Wednesday, 2 days ago. And that's what I'm going to talk about on the next part B of the therapy reflections of this series, of this particular episode. What are we up to? 10, 9, 10, I think it is. So part B is going to be a continuation on from this, and it gets even deeper, but it gets even better. It gets even more insightful. But the main takeaways from this one was, the main take was that memory that has now, there's all these offshoots of memories from this particular memory, and it's there's a lot there, that there's trauma in that I didn't even think of, that's been just burying itself in my psyche for years and years and years, and I forgot it was even there. But also the fact that I can now see clearly that the world is a bit too bright, and it is too bright, and what it's like when I'm in these hibernation modes, down in the tunnel, in the damp tunnel. I can feel it now. I can feel this further understanding, and in true Eliot style, it's got to be a bit abstract. It's got to sort of not make sense to make sense. And that's exactly what's happened here, with the tunnel and the top of the tunnel and the ladder being shiny itself, and then the world being shiny. But then also probably the biggest takeaway though was that my sub parts, my inner parts, they're all at the top. They're all trying to get me out of the hole and get me into the world. And they're like, "Look, Elliot, we're going to protect you. We know it's bright. We've got a pair of sunglasses for you. Walk with us. We'll look after you." That's essentially what they're saying. But the huge thing, or the big thing, the biggest thing for me though, was that my inner critic was one of those supporters. It was one of those really great supporters. It was the one that was in the middle, because it's been there the longest. It's been there the whole time. It's the chief, of all my sub parts, my inner parts. And although, man, he rides me like nothing else, I know that it's all out of the goodness, you could say, of my inner critic's heart. My inner critic has one goal and one goal only, and that is to protect me and to see me succeed. And it is doing the best job that it can. It just can be quite overwhelming at times. I just need to get to the point where my inner critic trusts me, the self, to say, "Look, hang on a second, just back down a little bit. Just trust me. Trust me on this. I think I've got this, Follow me. Where's all the other subparts? Where's all the other inner parts? Come on, inner critic. 14, 15-year-old self, I know you and the loose cannon, the 16-year-old, got a lot to talk about, but come on, follow me. I swear, I've got the right way to do these things, and if I don't, I know you guys will jump in for me anyway, but just let me have a chance here. Let me have a go. Bit of breathing space, But the fact that the inner critic is actually a positive influence on my life and not this huge negative that I have always associated it with, that was huge. That was huge. But it gets even bigger the next therapy session I had, and I'm so glad I had it so soon that I booked in. The week later, it's sending me broke, but man, this was big stuff. This was big stuff. So anyway, that'll do. That'll do for this episode. Thank you everybody once again for listening. I do appreciate it. If you've enjoyed this episode or got any questions about internal family, you probably do have questions potentially if you're not aware of internal family systems therapy before, because I haven't probably done a great job of explaining it, and I'm going to do that. I will. I just need to find the time to really knuckle down and really drill into it, because I'm still learning. I'm still learning every session I have with my therapist. I'm learning more and more about the therapy itself, how it can affect me. But then, of course, I've got to try and think about, okay, but how does this then affect other people? And how can I explain it to other people that's in a way that's understandable and digestible? And that's the hard part. And I haven't quite got that nailed down yet. But as soon as I do, I'll let you all know. There'll be an episode. I'll explain it all as clearly as I can. And maybe this will be a bit clearer as well. But I hope I did get across, though, that these inner parts, like, they're real. Let me tell you, they are real, definitely. And they pull a lot of the strings. And they're only doing it to try and help me and protect me. But they just need a bit of trust when it comes to me, the self, being able to be the conductor, of the orchestra, you could say, of all these different parts. But, they've seen the self, me, make some mistakes along the way. They're like, well, Elliot, this has happened in the past. We don't want that happening again. That was terrible. Like, I don't know if we can trust you with this one. But, yeah, that's the argument that I've got to build from within to say that, no, you can trust me because we've done the work. We've all done the work together. You've been there when I've done the work. The understanding of the world now that I have. Please trust me, please. And bring those sunglasses because, my God, it is bright out here. It is so bright, which makes so much sense with the way that I live my life because everything I try and do at night. And even now I'm doing a podcast episode now at 10:15 at night because it's dark and I feel safe. I feel safe. The world has quietened down a bit. Everyone's sort of at home going to bed. Finally, I get some peace, and it makes complete sense as to why I try and do everything at night because the world's too bright. And now I've seen it so clearly from my right brain, it just makes so much sense to me. It does. And I was like, yeah, I am in this tunnel when I'm hibernating, and I don't want to crawl out because it is so bright. So let's just roll over. It's damp in here. The walls are so close. I'm getting claustrophobic, but man, it still feels safer than being out there. But that's what my inner parts are doing. They're trying to convince me of the fact that, no, we can do this. And this is what I need to believe within myself as well. No, we can do this. It's bright, but here's the sunnies. Put some sunnies on. We've got this. We can do this. All right, that'll do. Thank you, everybody. I can't wait to bring you part 2 because if you enjoyed hearing, this sort of insight into my therapy, the next one is just as interesting, I think, and a lot of great improvements are going to be made, I think, from these two. It won't be straight away, but I think give it time. I'll look back and go, yeah, these 2 therapy sessions were pivotal, no question about that. So yeah, but if you've got any questions about internal family systems therapy, please feel free to let me know on Instagram at elliot.t.waters. If you've got some, I don't know, if maybe you've gone through something similar yourself, because a lot of you listening probably have done or are doing internal family systems therapy or schema therapy. Maybe there's parts involved in that too. A few different therapists, not just IFS that do this, but IFS does it the best, I think, or at least for me. But maybe you've got your own 16-year-old loose cannons or workaholics that are just making you work to the bone because that's the only way it knows how to protect you. Maybe you've got similar parts or different parts as well, but they're doing the same sort of thing. Feel free to let me know. I'd love to hear it because, at times I still feel alone on this journey as well. And I still think, man, no one's doing what I'm doing. Who on earth is going on about, workaholics and cognitive overthinkers? Like, that's crazy talk, man. That's crazy. But I don't think it's as crazy as I first thought. I actually think it makes a lot of sense. And it's actually very sensible to have these parts. And if you've got these subparts, you're very, very lucky. So, but anyway, until next time, thank you for listening, everybody. If you're enjoying the show, feel free to like, subscribe, give the show a great rating, and you can share it around with your mates. Please do. If you think you know someone who might get some sort of benefit out of this, please pass the show on. That would be great. And they can have a bit of a listen. They can reach out to me as well on Instagram or whatever, and we'll come up with something that way as well. So please, please share it around if you could. But until next time, thank you for listening to the Dysregulated podcast, and I can't wait to bring you part B of my therapy reflections. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.